Hello everyone, this is part 11 of What If Naruto Met Past Hinata, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. 5 months from chapter 15, August. There had always been something about Hanabi. A certain, unattainable, type of funny charm that hovered around her the way it does uppity old women. You cannot bring yourself to hate them, because they are both rude and so smart at the same time. At least, that's what Hinata was thinking on as she stared at her younger sister, overcome by a swell of emotions. Hanabi was shockingly calm, her own face stoic in the dim light, Kaori seated beside her, stiff and cold. So, you two are? Naruto stared between the two of them, looking as confused as anybody might have been had two distinctly unfriendly family members called him over as unexpectedly as they. Kaori's eyes narrowed in distaste. Engaged. He finished firmly, fist tightening ever so on his knee. They were kneeling on the matted floors of one of many Hyuga tea rooms, close together but a million miles away. Hanabi let her eyes flick to her sister's, mouth opening to speak. I am inviting you to the wedding. Hinata felt her eyes go wide at such a blunt declaration, caught completely unawares. Hanabi nodded once and then went on to an equally surprised Naruto, that includes you, Hokage-sama. Naruto. Just Naruto. Naruto mumbled, looking at Hinata, who was too busy trying to understand what exactly had transpired between them, coming over and the words, Kaori, Hanabi, married, tumbling from her father's thin lips. When? Hinata said suddenly, and Kaori looked at the woman with dulled, uninterested eyes. A month from this coming week. He stated dryly, and Naruto looked as dazzled as ever. No, I meant, how long have you been engaged? Hinata said sharply, cutting off Kaori's snide remark. Hanabi looked guilty, glancing to the opposite wall. 5 months. Kaori answered, though Hinata's eyes were solely trained on her sister. They take that long, he said, rubbing his forehead, remembering the endless 2 months of planning for his own wedding. It had been agonizing then, there was no telling how awful a wedding that took more than 4 months to plan would be. 5. Hinata gasped, face opening up in surprise. Hanabi looked pained and her kimono rustled as she shifted uncomfortably in her place. It really hasn't been that long. Many people are engaged for much longer, she said softly, and Hinata just let her eyes rest where they were. Hanabi-chan, she whispered, her sister avoiding any official contact between the two. Hanabi, why didn't you tell me? Hanabi finally broke inside, moving towards the door and standing, Kaori looking up as she left. Please excuse me, she said softly, her hand sliding the door open before she stepped up into the main hallway. Hinata instantly stood, struggling to gain her proper balance, her belly tight and round and almost always in the way. Naruto's reflexes caught her elbow, easing her up along. Don't be long, he muttered in her ear, and Kaori stared at the floor. Hinata nodded and quickly followed her sister out of the room as quickly as her body would allow. Hanabi had gone quite far by the time she stopped, standing at the edge of the compound, head leaning against a wall. She leaned her head against the cool stone and breathed, hand covering her face. She hadn't expected her sister to look so. Hanabi, Hinata called, stepping out from a hedge to follow her sister's trailing path. Hanabi's eyes opened as she turned towards the noise. Sister, she murmured as Hinata approached, hands holding themselves nervously. What are you thinking? Hinata said loudly, walking closer, eyes still marred with shock. Just what were you thinking when you agreed to this? She cried, grabbing Hanabi's shoulder, only to have the younger twist from her GS. I wasn't thinking anything, she replied weakly, and Hinata's face constricted in anger. They have you stupid now. Blindly following like a lamb. Hinata continued, forcing Hanabi to look at her. Tell me, Hanabi, do they have you dumb as well? Hanabi prickled in irritation. You don't understand. How could I not, Hanabi? You're marrying that man. That pig. Do you know what he will do to you? Are you aware what exactly you've gotten yourself into? I know you value your position, but really, Hanabi. Hinata continued, glad the last person she'd seen was more than 100 feet away, and for once thankful that the compound was such a sprawling facility. Hanabi recoiled as Hinata took another step. I'm not a fool. And I'm not blind, sister. Hinata shook her head. Then you understand what this means. What this means. They'll keep you locked in here, Hanabi. You won't be allowed any freedoms once you're tied to him. This is father's idea of manipulation. Hanabi stopped her sister. Father had nothing to do with this, she said sharply, causing Hinata to look on, confused. It was my own choice, so you can quit your nagging. Hinata felt somewhat relieved that her sassy, opinionated younger sibling had surfaced a little, but the effect of Hanabi's words was slowly setting in. Why you chose this, Hinata said in disbelief. Hanabi looked away, off towards the encroaching forest. It was mandatory. She turned back to Hinata. There was no other choice for me. She couldn't tell her sister the truth. Not now. Hinata was already upset enough, and Hanabi didn't have to think twice about her current condition to realize that discretion was the word to remember. Still, she couldn't keep the pain from gnawing at her chest. I don't go willingly, she said softly, at least my heart doesn't. Hinata tilted her head at her sister, feeling the anger ebb into a throbbing sympathy. Hanabi narrowed her eyes and stared at the grass beneath their feet. He does not love me, and I do not wish him to. Still, she looked at the compound, a specific alcove between two high maples, the shade and fragrant clusters of flowers that gathered round their bases, shielded by a low house. There is another. Lavender eyes widened. What? She hissed, stepping straight up to Hanabi, a pale hand on the younger woman's elbow. What do you mean, another? Hanabi smiled and chuckled dryly. Exactly as I say. She continued staring at the shadowed pass between the house and the maples. Such surprise had covered Hanabi, walking to the gardens to oversee as her father had instructed, a menial task to get her out of his hair for a few hours. Besides, Hiyashi knew that Hanabi enjoyed the air. She had instantly recognized the girl. She was a small young thing, little more than 20, with eyes like the full moon, constantly curious and full of wonder. Her hair was long and dark and fell to her waist in heavy cascades. She, at that time, had a flower in her hair. She was a branch member, common of lineage and blood. They had not even bothered to seal her because she possessed such bare desire and talent for shinobi arts and also for darker reasons. Hanabi only truly knew her because of the controversy that clouded Azumi Hyuga like fog wherever she went. Her name was debated on constant basis. She was a shame to the clan, daughter of a Hyuga woman and a servant, and yet because she possessed Byakugan and Hyuga characteristics it was often argued she was indeed the daughter of her mother's husband, a man long from battle. Her expulsion hung carefully in the balance every time the council spoke of her, because what clan could be so prestigious, and yet, harbor some half-breed commoner? But even that could not have troubled Hanabi. She paid no heed to girls of her kind, except to entertain her own fantasies, as girls such as Azumi were pale and innocent and full of stories. No, what troubled her was the empty basket next to her feet, the peaches it had contained rolling to the ground, proving that had recently been dropped. Hanabi had paused on her way, following the trail of Azumi's robes to the person that had her tangled against him. Hanabi's eyes had widened in horror as she realized Kaori was holding her, their faces locked together as they kissed in the protection of the shade. Now, Hanabi could admit she shouldn't have felt so horribly betrayed, or surprised, stumbling backwards, almost falling into an azalea bush. It was a mutual consent that neither would be happy in their matrimony, even that other companionship might have been accepted, but it was not the fact that he was kissing her that made Hanabi's eyes blur with tears. It was the way he was kissing her, the way he held her, Hanabi whispered, remembering Kaori's hands tracing Azumi's face, the way he tucked her head under his chin, cheek resting on her hair, holding her to him so tenderly Hanabi might never have believed it was truly him. It made me realize just how alone I might be. Just how I would not be allowed such shadows to conceal my own affairs, if I ever were to find them. She looked at Hinata and her eyes were empty. I will never love because of my womanhood. As a man, Kaori is endowed the right to secrets, eyes are turned away, and the council will blind themselves because he is so dear to their endeavors, but I will never have such luxuries as love. Answer, I have become bitter, and depressed, because I cannot run away from a promise I have already made. She smiled at the end and Hinata found herself shivering in the August air. Hinata felt lead drop into her stomach, and as if procured from an outer sense, the instant reality of the situation condensed in her head. He loves her, truly. Hanabi murmured, folding her hands into her kimono. He loves her with all of his black heart, and he is so soft and tender to her. It wasn't the last time I saw them together. He treats her as a treasure, and there is nothing I will do to stop them, and I will never elicit such affections. He does not only love her, Hinata continued, rubbing her forehead in troubled thought, he has been protecting her. All this time, he's been keeping her safe. His desperation to get in with the upper branches may have started out as selfishness and bitterness, but now it has evolved into keeping her with him. Hanabi laughed. It was only later I realized that. You are truly wise, sister, to understand just moments after I tell you. Hinata smiled weakly at her sister's perseverance to smile despite such pain, and Hinata felt instantly regretful for everything. Hanabi smiled. Kaori is not a noble man. She turned to Hinata. He is a wheedling, dishonest man who would quicker s me in the back than hold my hand for public notice, and yet he contradicts himself with a heart that must sympathize with Izumi. He must feel as though she is his own personal duty to see that she does not suffer any more than he had to. Hinata nodded solemnly, her entire outlook of the man she had once held dear to her becoming even more twisted than before. If he were ever to go against the council, they will release their favor, and she will be expelled. Hinata said softly, looking towards the maple trees. If she is but his only happiness in this world, then who am I to think I am right to interfere? Still, he is afraid of me because he is aware I know, and I did not hide it from him. So he has made great leaps in finalizing our marriage, to settle his influence so it may never be revoked, so that she will always be able to be near him. And yet, Hinata said, and yet it troubles you, and whoever said that you must suffer either? Whoever provided that law? Hanabi took a step towards the house. There are SS to be made for those we hold dear in the world. Hinata watched as her sister took another step and then looked briefly over her shoulder. Sometimes, fate opens our eyes and we become aware of what must be, and your fate was dependent on my own. Hanabi. Hinata cracked, voice showing plainly that she was on the verge of tears. What are you even saying? I never once asked. Hanabi held up her slim hand. I was well aware of what I was getting myself into, Hinata. Contrary to what you believe, I am not as stupid as father leads them to believe, and I have the same fears you have, but I knew that I could weather them. Hinata felt a something slide down her cheek as Hanabi turned fully around to face her sister. I can live with myself being cold and heartless. You, however, could not, because your silly heart rules everything you do. It was not even plausible for you to marry him as they intended, and so out of my own selfishness to see you gone, I sold you off to a mongrel boy who has too much pride in his small accomplishments. She lifted her head and Hinata almost gasped at the look of aristocracy in her face. She was so beautiful, always more beautiful than Hinata, and yet she could not recall times when Hanabi had been anything but serious, anything but coldly beautiful, like their mother, trailing her father, refusing friends, refusing anything but training and obedience. She read alone, she played alone, a solitary child that Hinata did not understand how she felt about. A child who was strange and beautiful and better, and one that Hinata felt had no interest in her. But as it often was, as it was evident in the softness of Hanabi's face in sorrow, of her emotions, of her words, of her overbearing resemblance to her own silly self, Hinata realized she was wrong. So she didn't gasp. Instead, Hinata went forward, grabbing her sister and pulling her face, tucking it on her shoulder, her own cheek laying in the same way Kaori's had lain across Izumi's. Hanabi-chan, she whispered, and Hanabi felt her eyes frozen wide, hands hanging astounded at her sides. Hanabi, I'm sorry I never held you more, or loved you more, or was there more. Hanabi felt the tears hit the top of her hair as Hinata cradled her sister's head. Hanabi couldn't say anything as Hinata continued, voice trembling. Such emotional Hyuga women, such horrible Hyuga women we are. She whimpered, and never once did I hold you like I should have, the way I should have so many times when you were alone. Hanabi felt her hands quiver in their skin as she felt the disgraceful tears well into her eyes, the fingers flexing, as if cracking through years of ice, before they grabbed the arms holding her head, digging themselves into Hinata's clothes. Forgive me, Hanabi, forgive me for not understanding sooner. Hanabi felt her eyes slide shut as Hinata held her sister closer. You were so torn. You didn't know if you would be lonelier if I left, or if father turned you aside. I'm sorry, Hanabi, I'm sorry. All along, you were the one most troubled, you were the one who had to watch as everything fell apart. I'm so sorry, Hanabi. I'm so sorry that I don't deserve you. Don't be sorry, Hanabi begged, feeling horribly shameful for the tears tumbling down her cheeks. Don't be sorry, please. I've poured everything into you. Please don't forget that, and never pity me. Be happy, be so happy you burst. Be happy for me. Hinata kissed her sister's temple. I promise Hanabi-chan, that I will never forget. If Hinata could no longer be with her sister, she would always hold her in her heart. The wedding came too quickly. It was a grand affair, because that is how it is with lies. She looked stunning and Naruto was officially there, so just about everyone else was. Her father was civil, and Kaori was emotionless. Hinata let her sister go that day, but she did not forget. She watched in stone silence as Kaori made his paper vows and Hanabi her own. It was a spectacle. A poor excuse for love, but the Hyuga enjoy reminding the village of what they are, but never who. Azumi cried. None noticed, and Hinata bowed her head. It was tiresome, but it was mandatory, those silent tears. So when Hanabi turned her head away from Kaori, Hinata turned her head from Hanabi forever. Because Hinata was the other, and Hanabi was not, and it was too late for fantasies of sisterhood. Time had not waited for them, and it never would. But never did Hinata forget. They were two others. And so they have to be apart, but achingly together. Naruto lurched forward with a heavy gasp. Blinking rapidly he pushed back his sweaty hair and his heart thumped rapidly against his ribs, so much so that he was convinced it would burst through his skin at any moment. He swallowed and let out a shuddering breath, holding his head in his palms, massaging his brow. It had been the dream again. The agonizing one that taunted him and TD him and mocked him. Tsunade said the interference would be heavy now, but he was convinced he could have survived it. With hesitance, though his heart continued its wild thrashing, he looked over at the space beside him, the moonlight casting shadows on the floor and tracing out the outline dictated by sheets and blankets. Hot August air poured in through the open window and Naruto continued to stoop himself over his legs, abandoning the covers and staring at the woman beside him. She hadn't stirred an inch, so peacefully asleep she was not even aware of his nightmares. Her cheeks were pale and white, and her long hair tangled itself against her back, though she was facing him, her eyes moving rapidly beneath their lids as she dreamed. Naruto touched her face softly, letting his fingers rope into the hair that was caught in front of her ears. She sighed and he stiffened, but then relaxed, realizing she'd only moved to turn her cheek into his palm. A mumbled something issued over the din of crickets and wind from outside. He let his thumb roam the line of her face before slowly pulling his hand away. She grumbled and he couldn't help but smile, her face pulling into a little frown at the loss of contact. Naruto wished he could sleep, his arms wrapped around her, reassured. Her patient breathing hitting his body with every tiny intake of air, reminding him he wasn't alone, he'd never be alone, little whispers in her sleepiness, incoherent messages conveyed through the rosy lips that rested against her wrist, fingers curling into the pillow near her head. Gaara had warned him of this. The sleeplessness, the inability to rest for fear that, it was so vile he could not even give it the respect of proper names, the maddening beast inside him would turn him into something hollow. He raked his tightened hands through his hair and thought deeply, eyes playing on the white linens beneath him. This had been the fourth night in a string of nights he had not been able to let down his guard for more than a moment. It was crucial, Tsunade had said, that he be vigilant, to keep emotions in check, to be calm. All the Kyuubi needed in his state was a window, and the fox was well aware of this. Naruto grimaced. It was one thing to have a demon in your head, telling you to kill your wife while you slept, but it was another entirely when that demon was a conniving, vicious, intelligent soul that talked to you and told you all its gruesome plans out of boredom alone. It was almost funny that the Kyuubi was taking such interest in the rebuilding of the seal. He appeared to be docile during the actual process, but when it came time for Naruto to return home, sore and almost pled by the pain in his head, he was nothing but an optimistic, persnickety creature, turning Naruto's thoughts against him, biding his time with patience, attempting to steal more of his container than he already had. But rebuilding seals was no easy business, even for someone as knowledgeable as Tsunade and the experts under contract she worked with. It was agonizing, for starters, and now, the side effects were more than apparent because you could not create a new seal if the old one was still damaged and ineffective after years of abuse. Naruto smirked into his palm as he stared out the window, almost biting his cheek in his amusement. He had not been what one would call watchful of his body, despite the devilish presence inside of him, but then again, no one had really ever taught him how. His street alone during his childhood was one for the records. How he ever functioned on rice and ramen he'd never really understand, not to mention his sweet tooth when he had the money to indulge it. He wasn't hungry often anymore, he hadn't felt really himself in weeks. Hinata stirred again beside him and Naruto felt the horrible pang of guilt hit his heart. He hated it with all of his being, this detainment of information from her. He could see it in her eyes sometimes, the hurt. He'd taken to locking himself up in his office, taking his dinner at the tower, staying away from her. He'd been being cautious, but what he took as precaution to potentially the one disaster he'd never forgive himself for, she took as distance. Still, she smiled for him, kissed him, and loved him just as much as he screamed for her now. He had never needed her so much, needed her to tell him he was going to be fine, that everything would work out. But, I can't, he whispered to the August nighttime, I can't do it to her. What it would do to her, to know that he was being operated on in such a fashion, in such a dangerous, shameful way. He couldn't do that to her. Not with her pregnant and already distraught by the recent marriage of her sister, she still hadn't truly recovered from the news of the engagement. Naruto didn't want her to worry. He didn't want her to be scared. Scared of him, of what he was capable of. It was the twisting in his stomach that kept deterring her eyes, avoiding her touch. He felt dirty, undeserving, a million things he couldn't name when he came home and she was hanging up laundry, the sun pouring into the house, the feeling of not belonging. The hurt he felt that it was causing her even the slightest pain. Phew phew phew. Naruto twitched, his legs working against him and lifting him out of bed. It couldn't have been more than 1 o'clock in the morning. He shifted on the floor, hastily pulling on his clothes before slipping from the bedroom. The door went shut and the crickets chirped their syncopated rhythms on the lawn, the rustle of curtains the only sound left behind as he became a shadow, and nothing more. Hinata opened her eyes and stared at the window. The wind hissed through the trees as she covered her hands with her face and turned towards her pillow. Her shoulders tensed for a moment, a choked sound coming out of her mouth. She whimpered, fingers clenching unconsciously, nails digging into her forehead. She felt the tears slide out of her eyes as she balled herself as much as she could on her side, her shoulders now trembling. He'd left, again. She'd been awake, again, for his departure. Hinata hung up the phone, fingers trailing over the surface of the plastic as she stood in the living room. Sakura had been helpful, consoling. But it wasn't enough. Hinata trusted Naruto. Trusted him with her everything, her life, her heart, her happiness, just everything, but his midnight disappearances were beginning to become suspicious. He avoided her, gave her glances out of the corner of his eye and nothing more, darting just out of her reach when she tried to gently pry the answer out of his stubborn fingers. With a sigh she moved to the center of the living room and sank onto the low couch, melting into the furniture, the silk robe she wore over her cotton pajamas gathering around her. It wasn't his fault. He was still so conditioned, so used to facing things alone, to dealing with himself by himself. It was part of him he had not been very willing to share. Sasuke had taken that part of him, and hadn't returned it, and so in her own way, Hinata had built him a new trust, and though it was weak, it was a good one and it was solid. But even it had its limits, it appeared. She didn't know where he was going. She almost didn't want to know. There it went, the selfish, horrible part of her that still thrived on covering the truth with a sugar-coated gauze. Something sweet to ease the pain while she slept alone. He looks so troubled, she mumbled, leaning her head back, hair so long it almost grazed the floor. The baby kicked hard against her stomach and she winced a little. He'll be home soon. Don't worry, she soothed, rubbing her stomach tenderly. She prayed it would be true, but somehow that wasn't enough. She stared at the door nearby, the hush of night and the crickets. Hinata stared at the door for the longest time. It was hot, dreadfully hot. Hinata could feel the still air hang lifelessly in the sky, a few scattered clouds passing overhead as she walked the streets. She knew she shouldn't. It was dangerous, she couldn't really fight. It was dark. Naruto would be angry. Still, she had to. She just had to. She needed to know. She needed to know so badly, to confirm that her absolute worst fear was not going to come true. She was inconspicuous as she traveled, her head hung low, but she didn't use her Byakugan. She used her sense. And when it took her to an old playground, she was the most surprised, though she was sure Naruto was probably far more confused than surprised. He was sitting on the bench, staring out over the ball field and the swings and huge trees. His hand was balanced on his chin, Hokage robed DRD over the wood of the seat. He didn't see her at first, but Hinata, was she glad? Glad he couldn't see the tears of relief, the sudden leaden weight that released itself from her stomach. She was so glad she almost laughed. Almost laughed because she'd been so stupid. If Naruto had been cheating on her with anyone, it was with an old wooden bench, and if that's what Naruto wanted at night, well, Hinata would let him have it. But still, an old wooden bench didn't account for the way he skirted her like a disease. Old benches were fine, but they provided no plausible explanation as to why Naruto preferred them over her. So Hinata took a step forward, a leaf rustled underfoot and she watched him turn his head over his shoulder in alarm. Hina, he rasped, and Hinata looked down at the ground and took another step forward, and another, and another and another until she was finally where she'd wanted to be for weeks. Next to him. What are you doing out here? She whispered, lowering herself down. Naruto looked at her, dumbstruck. How did you know I was here? She chuckled. Silly Naruto-kun. She laughed, reverting herself back to his old names for the sake of comfort. She slowly touched his hand. He flinched and Hinata tightened her fingertips over his own. Don't you remember? I love you. He looked guilty at her and sighed. Life just wasn't so simple anymore. I love you too. So much. He responded and Hinata stared ahead of her, their hands still connected. Tell me why you don't stay with me anymore. Is it me? Naruto bit the inside of his cheek. No, Hinata. Never. He mumbled and Hinata smiled, letting out a small puff of air from her nose. The man swallowed stiffly. I don't want to tell you. He said softly and Hinata's smile twitched. I don't want you to think that. She whispered back and Naruto let go of his breath. I want you to tell me why you're so troubled, so that I can help you. She looked at him sideways and he watched as her face spread into a small, certain smile. You are not very good at pretending, Naruto. I've spoiled you. He stared at her and she leaned slowly towards him, until her head was tucked rightfully on his shoulder. Tell me, please, she breathed, and Naruto leaned his cheek into her hair. Hi. He started, staring at the mulch under their feet. Hi Hina-chan. It's my seal. Hinata blinked slowly. Oh, she said, and Naruto closed his eyes. It hurts, he whispered, almost laughing. It hurts like a mother. She stopped him, raising her head. Naruto, she said sternly and he smiled, a lopsided, uncomfortable grin. Well, it does. It hurts a lot. And, my head, he paused and looked at the stars. Hinata suddenly nodded her head. I was wondering who you were hearing that I couldn't. I hear you at night sometimes. He flushed and Hinata continued nodding along, putting the pieces together. It makes more sense now. You've been having Tsunade-sama help you, ne? Oh, this is so strange, Naruto. I feel like a shinobi again. She laughed and Naruto looked tired, but pleased as she giggled at her own silliness. He shifted slightly and Hinata stopped laughing and stared at him. Naruto looked away. It doesn't bother you. He looked up at her, blue eyes dull, but still waiting expectantly as his lips fumbled for the words. It doesn't scare you. Hinata's eyes widened as she slowly looked out over the playground. It does scare me, but not because I'm afraid of what you could do. I know what you could do, Naruto. She looked at her husband, but I also know, and even more than knowing, that you won't. That you wouldn't. So it's not that I'm afraid of you, but, I suppose, now that I think on it, I'm afraid, for you. I don't like not having the power to help you, or protect you, or keep you safe. She stared at the fingers in her lap, hands that were so mismatched curled together in an intimate embrace. His hand was warm. Hinata stroked the bony knuckles of his hands. Good hands. Strong hands. Hands that held you. Hands that had courage and love. Valiant hands. Silly hands sometimes. Soft hands, when they wanted to be. Hands that had cared. Hands that would care. Hands that breathed life and took it, all with a touch. But it was dangerous, she knew. The king he could do now was a different kind of king. It wasn't Naruto. It wasn't Naruto at all, and Hinata knew, probably more than Naruto knew, that it would never be Naruto. I'm not scared of you, Hinata said again, tightening her hold. I won't ever be scared of you, because you're mine. Her eyes squinted in the starlight, a bird chirped in a tree, a sudden sound that made the crickets pause. Do you know what that means? What it means to me, to call you mine. She took his chin in her hand and pulled it towards her, so that his cloudy eyes looked right into her own. Even if you killed me. Even if you hurt me. Even if you destroyed and took and stole and made, I would still love you because you are mine before any demon will ever have you, before any seal. You belong to me and you're mine all alone to hold and keep and cherish until the day death tears me from you. I promised you that. I vowed to that. Naruto's head shuddered as he dropped it forward, her fingers falling from his chin and onto his en. Hot tears hit the back of her hand as Naruto held his head over his lap. In sickness and in health, Naruto-kun, she said softly, and the night hung still and hot in the sky. Shikamaru Nara stared out at the park, watching in silence as two people rose from the small wooden bench. He smiled into his cigarette, eyes wandering away from the sight of them, still encased in familial shadows. There was something so intimate about the way he held his wife's hand in his own, and if Shikamaru hadn't seen it with his own eyes on more than one occasion, he would never have guessed it were possible for such a tiny action to amount to something so close he had to turn from it. He'd come out at such an hour, dragged himself from his bed and a very asleep Temari, to meet with an old friend on a bench. The man acclaimed as a genius shook his head. There were so many mysteries left in the world that were still unsolved, it seemed, for Shikamaru Nara could still not capture the idea that two people could love each other so much. But destiny doesn't compromise, because what must be, must always be. Everything must come full circle, even over love. The days after had melted into a reoccurring happiness. Silent joys accompanied where once there hung a great void in Hinata's life, but sometimes, even what we claim as victory in the war is really nothing more than victory in battle. Time doesn't wait for us to catch up. The day began steady. It had been a week since the night on the bench, but Hinata had wasted no time in taking action. She was willing to use her influence if it meant life could be easier for Naruto, and she had no problem twisting a few strings and making a few people smile in exchange for the necessary arrangements. The reasons were disclosed, only whispered into trustworthy ears. Naruto didn't want his people to worry over him, though Hinata wasn't a fool and knew very well that worry was the least from Naruto's mind at the time. Images of hate and discrimination had been conjuring in his head lately, and demonic manipulation was almost too easy for someone with as soft-hearted as Naruto. He was dancing precariously on the edges, and though it did make Hinata nervous, Naruto was doing better, things were going slowly, but to an extent, well. His smile was brightening, but the bags were yet growing underneath his eyes, a clear indication that sleep was no choice, and Hinata had arranged for a special guest to arrive. Gaara was more than happy to come, or as happy as he would ever have let on, but when he took one look at Naruto's surprised face he couldn't help but let his jaw tick ever so. The embrace had been a true display. Naruto was so thrilled to see the very dearest of his friends it had brought tears to his eyes, but Hinata wasn't as amused as the others watching the small welcoming party. Temari looked at her and Hinata spoke the mutual understanding. The empathy was crucial. Gaara's support was one of the things that would pull Naruto out, they both knew. They both could only extend their hands so far into the lives of the ones they held so dear, but even around them, even around Naruto, there was a wall that couldn't be breached unless by the other. It was the bond, the unforgiving hate, the pain, the tears, the blood that attached the two of them and held them like paste to each other, near inseparable save for the vast miles that usually harbored their relationship. The afternoon had passed gaily. Lunch had been an affair and Gaara had looked so amused that Hinata had to laugh into her fan. Naruto had looked happier than he had in months and Gaara, after pulling her aside several times to gain detail, could understand why. He's uncertain. He's glad that I'm here. That I've lived it, that there's something to compare to. The Kazekage had said softly and Hinata had nodded along, but you mustn't take it lightly. He's dangerous, Hinata, intentionally or not. He's as dangerous as I was, and probably more. If he were to go over, there's no telling if he'd be able to bring himself back. Hinata closed her eyes thoughtfully. Hi. But he is still. Gaara had put a hand on her own and Hinata's eyes flashed open, staring into the turquoise that gazed steadily down at her. If Naruto were to ever show signs, you must heed them. There is more resting on you now. If Naruto were to ever hurt you in any way, Hinata, I can say with certainty he would rather kill himself, and probably would. The soft hand, untouched by steel or injury, tightened on Hinata's. Don't help him towards that fate. He is my husband, Gaara. I would give my life for him. Hinata breathed. Gaara's eyes hooded and he let her hand go slowly, taking a step backwards, towards the room they had previously been congregating in. I see. He paused. Very well. He finished softly before watching as Temari peeked her head out from the doorway, Shikamaru walking past her with his hands shoved in his pockets. Gaara. He wants to talk. We're all heading out for something to drink. You all can join us later. Hinata chuckled and rubbed her belly, allowing Temari to amend her statement. You're welcome to come along, Hinata. I won't drink. Shikamaru made a strange snorting noise through his nose that made his wife's eyes harden into cut blue stone. Asking you to not drink is like saying I won't smoke. We both say we won't anymore but end up drunk and hacking up tar anyway. He drawled and Temari rolled her eyes. Hinata just laughed and held up her hand defensively. No, you go enjoy yourselves together. I'll stay for a while longer. I'd like to talk to a few of the women here. One of them just got out of the hospital, and I'd like to know how she's doing. She smiled brightly and Temari just shrugged and went to stand next to her husband before they both took to the hallway, bickering about something Hinata couldn't truly hear. With a sigh she stared at the closed door where the other two had retreated and found it surprisingly silent. With her head tilted slightly, Hinata walked towards it, and as she approached a horrible feeling settled into her stomach. Naruto. She could hear the sound of Gaara's soft voice suddenly break the eerie quiet. Ah, there you are, Hinata-chan. What are you? The silver-haired copycat that had appeared from her left stopped as Hinata held up her hand, eyes staring at the door. There was a low groan and Kakashi followed her eyes just as it issued. You mean the brat, don't you? Every hair on Hinata's body went up. She felt every nerve kick into gear as she stiffened, Kakashi's visible eye widening. She could practically feel Gaara tighten on the other side of the door and then relax. I see. So tell me then, do you recognize me? Hinata felt herself unable to move as the sound hit her ears, the heavy rake of claws across stone, the steady shrieking in her brain that made Kakashi stand in awe. It is too easy. The horrible voice was thick with amusement as it rasped and growled its way out of Naruto's tea. Her mouth opened a fraction. The boy is weak. Cuckoo. He tries to tell himself he can stop me but he won't. He will. Gaara said softly, but with conviction, he doesn't need you anymore. He has forged his own ways. He has more than enough to keep you sealed away, imprisoned. What do you know, weak one? What could you give him? Your words are as empty as your heart. I know your story. I was there. The voice laughed and Hinata felt pins drive into every ounce of her. Horrible, burning sensations eating away at her skin, emanating from behind the door. You waited, did you not, great one? Gaara said with no emotion, no betraying tone in his voice. You waited for this. For Naruto to become emotional, you've been biding your time, haven't you, great one? The brat is too easy. He is weak, he is nothing more than a puppet on a string. Somewhere, in the back of her mind, Hinata heard a distant snap, a pop of energy that released and then came back with enough strength to break the wall down. She lurched towards the door. Kakashi instantly reacted as she turned sideways and shoved her shoulder through, bursting into the wall where Naruto's figure stood hunched in a corner, his hand, only now a ragged claw still kept its nails embedded in the wall. Gaara was standing as well, the tension in the room breaking as soon as Hinata had entered. Hinata. Kakashi's voice was lost as Hinata stood before the creature. Blood red seeped where cerulean once pulled and the fangs distended past his lips. It was not Naruto. It was not Naruto at all. There was no trace of her Naruto, the one that belonged to her. Not to him. The animal raised what might have been Naruto's head and looked at her, and Hinata felt as in her heart just by staring at it. It radiated red, scarlet sped from its fingertips, pure energy that burned the floor and walls and crackled the air around her head. The whole room smelled of ash, Hinata realized, as the creature stared at her and smiled, a grotesque twist of its lips to take on the form of a sneer. Hinata realized in that instant something she hadn't before. It recognized her. The dear one. As soon as the words were expelled, the creature's hands wrapped around its head and set itself into the wall. You will not touch her. Hinata heard Naruto's voice break through the clouds of red before her as he rammed himself against the wall. You will not touch her. His voice roared across the room as he struggled, his arms pushing themselves back down to his sides, a violent, twisted dance within his own mind. It was agonizing, and as he went, Naruto put up the fight, his body convulsing and rippling with the conflictions within him. Hinata could not find the words as she watched her husband slowly be defeated, the horror and shock and pain littered on her face. She had been so wrong. So stupid. So stupid. A stupid, little girl. It lied to him. It lied to him and spoke to him within his mind, she could see. He recoiled. He retreated as the creature smiled once more, lips stretching back against. You have underestimated me, and so perhaps you might be taught to obey your master. Perhaps I should take what is most dear and precious of all and show you the lies they spin, so perhaps you will have nothing to fight for, and you will be alone. You have always been alone, except for me, brat. I have always been here. It was a blur as Hinata's mouth opened on its own accord. Don't listen to him. He's lying. He's lying to you. Don't listen. Hinata made the fatal mistake though as she raised her eyes to the beast. I am not afraid of you. What was not? Naruto lifted its head and the two dumbstruck Kakashi bolted towards the heiress. Gaara's hand extended. Hinata felt the red-hot knife of fire as its hand tore clean through her shoulder splitting neatly, so easily, like an old wound. She felt herself dragged down, a million hands on her knees, knocking her to the floor. She hadn't even seen it coming. She remembered fire. Fire on her skin, burning, eating fire, and Naruto. Naruto with eyes that were frozen in time, blue eyes dull and cold. She remembered blood, she remembered fire. She didn't have the strength to ask why as she collapsed forward, the red still spilling from him like blood. Her eyes fluttered, numb, and then, Hinata fell, his name still tickling her lips. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.